This one, I'm Jyotsna Kumar, and this is World DNA. Let's begin with the headlines. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces say they have agreed to withdraw their fighters from the two districts they held in Aleppo city under a ceasefire. People take to streets again in Tehran and other cities as protests across Iran reach two-week mark. Fears of deadly crackdown grow as country remains under an internet blockade. President Donald Trump says the United States is ready to help as protests continue in Iran. Trump says on social media, Iran is looking at freedom, perhaps like never before. The USA stands ready to help.
Down, down with deportation. Down, down with deportation.
Down, down with occupation.
There's also been using national guard.
Thousands take to the streets of Minneapolis chanting the name of the woman killed by a federal agent in the city. More than 1,000 events are planned across the U.S. under the slogan, ICE Out for Good. U.S. Department of State urges Americans to leave Venezuela immediately due to security risks. The advisory warns against threat from groups of armed militias. Thousands of farmers protest in Ireland against the EU-Mercosur trade deal. Farmers have been protesting across Europe because they say the deal puts their livelihoods at risk by allowing South American agriculture goods to flood the European market. Myanmar's junta opens voting in the second phase of elections. Democracy watchdogs have criticized the heavily restricted polls as a way for military to prolong its rule in civilian guise. U.S. President Donald Trump signs an executive order to protect Venezuelan oil revenue held in U.S. Treasury accounts from seizure by courts or creditors, aiming to secure those funds for U.S. foreign policy goals after Maduro's ouster. Now, Iranians continue to protest. Thousands of Iranians are back on the streets, and this is despite a deadly crackdown and a threat of death penalty. This is, as U.S. President Donald Trump said, U.S. is ready to help Iranians achieve freedom. The 2 weeks of demonstrations have posed as one of the biggest challenges to the theocratic authorities who have ruled Iran since 1979. Crowds gathered again on Saturday in the north of the Iranian capital, setting off fireworks and banging pots as they shouted slogans in support of the ousted monarchy. Video shared on social media showed crowds gathered in Punak Square in Tehran as they chanted anti-government slogans and said, "Long live the Shah," as fireworks erupted overhead. The internet down in Iran and phone lines have been cut off. According to the US-based human rights activist news agency, the death toll in the protests has now grown to at least 72. Not over 2,300 people have been detained. Authorities have reportedly arrested 100 armed rioters in a town just outside Tehran. Iran's Attorney General has now warned that anyone taking part in protests will be considered an enemy of God. The charge comes with the death penalty under Iranian law. Now in London, meanwhile, a protester briefly replaced the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran on its London embassy with a former flag. A video posted to social media showed a man replace the flag with one used during the rule of the ousted Shah. It stayed in place for several minutes before being removed. From abroad, a familiar name is trying to shape the moment. The exiled son of Iran's toppled monarch, Reza Pahlavi. He has urged Iranians to go further, calling on them to seize city centers. He also praised Iranian workers to launch a nationwide strike.
Our goal is no longer merely to come to the streets. The goal is to prepare for seizing the centers of cities and holding them.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Saturday that his country was ready to help the movement. A day earlier, he had said that Iran was in big trouble. Trump wrote on social media, and I'm quoting, "Iran is looking at freedom perhaps like never before. The USA stands ready to help." A U.S. media report said that officials are discussing how to implement President Trump's warnings. The Wall Street Journal, citing insiders, reported that the Trump administration is reportedly drawing up preliminary plans for an attack on Iran. This could include large-scale airstrikes. The report added that there is no consensus in Washington on a specific course of action yet. Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council has announced the formation of a Supreme Military Committee under the command of the Saudi-led coalition, signaling heightened military readiness as peace talks with the Houthis remain stalled.
I announced the formation of the Supreme Military Committee under the leadership of the coalition forces. The committee will be tasked with preparing, equipping and commanding all forces and military formations and supporting them in readiness for the next phase should the militias reject peaceful solutions.
Meanwhile, thousands of demonstrators poured into the streets of the southern port city of Aden in support of the Southern Transitional Council, or STC, Yemen's main separatist group. The STC has denied reports that it plans to disband, even as its president, Aidarus al-Zubaydi, remains outside the country.
We categorically reject the dissolution of the Southern Transitional Council. The Southern Transitional Council represents us here. We have come in the hundreds of thousands in response to a call within 24 hours, mobilizing thousands around the Southern Transitional Council. The Southern Transitional Council will not end except by the will of the people. It was established by the will of the people, and it will not end except by the will of this people.
Protesters defied calls from Saudi-backed factions to stay home, chanting slogans against Saudi Arabia and Yemen's internationally recognized government. Many waved flags of former South Yemen, which was an independent state until 1990, and called for the establishment of a separate southern state. The STC, backed by the United Arab Emirates, seized parts of southern and eastern Yemen late last year, moves that intensified friction with Saudi Arabia. Yemen, which sits at the strategic southern gateway to the Red Sea, has been engulfed in civil war for more than a decade, with rising tensions now also straining relations between key regional allies involved in the conflict. And the U.S. State Department has urged Americans in Venezuela to leave the country immediately. They have cited risks from armed militia searching vehicles for U.S. citizens at roadblocks. The department has issued a security alert and called the situation in the country as fluid. It urged American citizens to use international flights to leave the country, warning them of armed militias called colectivos searching for cars for Americans or evidence of U.S. support. Now, the alert comes 1 week after the country's leader, Nicolas Maduro, was captured by U.S. forces in a lightning raid. Now, as per reports, members of collectivos were seen roaming on motorbikes and setting up roadblocks in capital Caracas. U.S. President Donald Trump also signed an emergency order on Friday to protect U.S.-held money derived from sales of Venezuelan oil. The White House released a fact sheet accompanying the order and said that the order was in line with President Trump's directive to advance U.S. foreign policy objectives in Venezuela. Trump, who has made clear that tapping Venezuela's vast oil reserves was a key goal in the U.S. ouster of Maduro, held a meeting on Friday where he pressed top American oil executives to invest in Venezuela. However, Trump was met with cautious reception from the CEOs. The chief executive of ExxonMobil describing the country as uninvestable without sweeping reforms. Now, following the meeting with oil executives, Trump took to his Truth Social and said that he loves the Venezuelan people and was working to make the country rich and safe again. The statement from Trump was also backed by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who said that the U.S. could lift more sanctions on Venezuela as soon as next week. Although despite these statements, Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, has once again denounced U.S. for the military raid and subsequent capture of Maduro. Rodriguez made her comments during a tour in the Miranda state while addressing a crowd of supporters who chanted, "Delcy, go on because you have my trust."
The Caribbean Sea must be a territory of peace. From here, we will not stop condemning the criminal aggression against the Venezuelan people that occurred in the early morning of January 3, 2026. It will go down in history as a great stain on United States-Venezuela relations.
Meanwhile, supporters of Nicolas Maduro staged protests on Saturday, a week after his dramatic capture by U.S. forces. Waving flags and placards with the face of the ex-leader and his wife Celia, around 1,000 protesters rallied in the west of Caracas and a few hundred in the eastern Petare district.
On January 3rd, we were unjustly attacked, and our constitutional president was taken from us. We are a sovereign country. We are a country of peace. We have a president of peace, President Nicolas Maduro Moros.
On Thursday, Venezuela released a number of imprisoned high-profile opposition figures, activists and journalists in what the government described as a gesture to seek peace. Trump also hailed the release of prisoners, saying he was happy to see Venezuela releasing the political prisoners, adding that he had canceled a second wave of strikes on the country.
I'm thrilled, happy. Thank God I'm going to enjoy my family again.
Now, in news from the United States, massive protests are sweeping across the country after a Minneapolis ICE agent fatally shot a woman, igniting nationwide outrage. In Minneapolis, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets, braving the freezing weather, demanding accountability, justice for the victim, and an end to what they described as aggressive and harmful enforcement practices. It was one of the hundreds of protests planned in towns and cities across the country over the weekend. Protesters held placards that explicitly called for ICE to leave Minnesota altogether, reflecting growing local frustration with federal immigration enforcement tactics after the shooting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the pure, unadulterated violence and lack of care from these ICE agents that are being deployed by this evil Nazi administration. Coming here means a lot because it could be any of us. Any of us could be taken, black-bagged, murdered, as we saw with Renee Good. So coming out here, bringing community to this movement is super important to get ICE out of Minnesota.
Meanwhile, according to a viral video, ICE agents in Minneapolis were confronted by a small crowd at a local gas station after they were seen stopping a man pumping gas and demanding proof of U.S. citizenship.
Are you a U.S. citizen or you got naturalized? You're naturalized?
In Washington, demonstrators gathered outside the White House to protest U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, calling for an end to federal immigration enforcement practices they say harm immigrant communities.
Trump must go now. Trump must go. Trump must go now. Trump must go now. Trump must go now. Trump must go.
Similar protests were also seen witnessed across North Carolina as hundreds of activists marched, held signs, and called for accountability and an end to aggressive immigration enforcement tactics.
All right, so I am so pleased to announce our first speaker, who is John Willett.
37-year-old Renee Nicole Good was shot dead earlier this week in Minneapolis by a federal agent as she appeared to drive or tried to drive away while agents approached her car, which they said was blocking their path. The White House has characterized the incident as part of an organized attack on U.S. law enforcement. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and other Minnesota officials have rejected that account, saying video footage shows Good's vehicle turning away and that she did not pose a threat to the agent's life. On Friday evening, hundreds of demonstrators gathered noisily outside Minneapolis hotels believed to be housing ICE agents and police. That said, several people were arrested and quickly released as tensions over the shooting continue to fuel protests.
Streets, no justice, no peace. We want our ICE out now. ICE out.
Now, human pregnancy may have just entered the age of microchips. A China-led team of scientists have built what they call the world's first mini womb on a chip, a 3D model that can mimic how a human embryo implants itself into the uterus. Now, developed by researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the technology replicates the most critical and most mysterious moment of pregnancy, when an embryo attaches, invades, and embeds itself into the uterine lining. Published in the journal Cell, the study can transform how scientists understand infertility and how doctors treat women who struggle to conceive. And this matters because 1 in 6 adults worldwide suffer from infertility, according to the World Health Organization, and yet the earliest stages of human pregnancy have remained largely out of reach due to ethical and practical limits. This chip-based womb changes that. It uses blastocysts, 5-day-old embryos, and lab-grown blastoids to recreate the entire implantation sequence from first contact to deep invasion into uterine tissue. The model even explains why some IVF attempts fail and allows scientists to screen thousands of existing drugs to improve implantation success. In short, a process that once happened hidden inside the human body can now be studied, tested, and potentially fixed on a chip. And this is not science fiction. This is the front line of reproductive medicine, and it can change how pregnancies begin. Now, in 2025, equity investors enjoyed blockbuster returns across markets. That positive sentiment for stocks extended into the first proper trading week of the new year. But despite the gains, it was not a smooth ride all through. Geopolitical tensions and President Trump's trade brinksmanship and wild policies whipsawed some assets and boosted others. Now, the uncertainty trend is forecast to extend to the coming week, with widespread predictions for extreme wild swings. While shifting focus to broader markets beyond stocks, precious metals and oil were the real winners. Gold surged over 4% after marking its best year since the 1979 oil crisis. Crude also gained at the start of 2026 on news U.S. big oil firms were reluctant to invest in Venezuela despite Trump's assurances and as protests in Iran escalate. Oil also posted its third straight weekly gain, with benchmark Brent crude rising 3.5% to about $63 per barrel. The dollar gained after economic data nearly wiped off bets for a Federal Reserve rate cuts this month. Bitcoin also gained at the start of 2026 to back above $90,500 mark. Now, with major assets covered, let's shift focus to the Asia-Pacific stock markets. The OCI stock index was the biggest gainer in Asia with a 5.6% surge. Benchmarks in China and Japan ended last week with over 3 perfect gains. Indian benchmarks were the only exception among major stock benchmarks to close out the week in the red. Renewed tariffs worries, valuation concerns, and deep foreign outflows hit Indian stocks. In the Americas, Wall Street risk-on fever showed no signs of abating in the new year. In the first full week of 2026, a synchronized cross-asset rally pushed U.S. stocks to close at fresh all-time highs. No single event triggered those moves. Canadian stocks extended gains after setting records in jaw-dropping year. The Canadian benchmark gained 2.8% after marking its best year since the 31% rebound in 2009 from the financial crisis. Now, Brazil's Bovespa rose 1.4% to extend a stellar performance in 2025. And looking across the Atlantic, European stocks soared despite political and economic turmoil across the region. On hopes of a rebound in German industries, the German DAX led gains in the region. European stocks extended their gains after closing 2025 near all-time highs, capping their strongest annual performance since 2021. The UK's FTSE rose nearly 2%. The French CAC gained 2.6% despite a budget crisis. Now, with having looked at market move, let's now turn to the overall economic outlook. And we begin with Asia. India remains the best performing major economy in the world despite Trump's tariff rhetoric. The uncertainty from U.S. President Trump's trade policies is weighing on the region's growth outlook. In addition, China continues to battle a property recession and a deep deflation from weak demand. In the Americas, mixed messages on the macro front clearly reflect a clouded outlook. Big Wall Street banks caution that stagflation's risks are on the rise. Trump's trade rhetoric extended to other economies in the region with a negative outlook for Canada and Brazil. In Europe, the standard norm across the region is a muted economic environment. Europe's growth engine, Germany, is struggling to get its manufacturing activity back on track. GDP in the UK contracted for the second straight month in October, with no growth seen since June. And in addition to those concerns, Trump's trade brinksmanship is hurting the economic outlook for the region. And celebrated actor Alan Cumming has been honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in Los Angeles, and the actor is on cloud nine. We leave you with this report. Do stay tuned. News and updates will follow on the other side. You're watching WION World. This was World Day.
I think it's really appropriate that theatre